Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Wednesday, July 9th, 2025, episode 433, and we're going to talk about creative destruction in higher education. So this is going to be a quick episode. It's something that I've been wanting to do ever since I saw that Richard Vedder had given a lecture for the Cato Institute a few months ago, a few weeks ago. They uploaded a video, and I've been wanting to watch it and then talk about it on this podcast. So, in the context, I don't know if you're aware, but there are a lot of colleges and universities that are closing. Philadelphia, which was known to be the greater Philadelphia area, was known to be uh, the city that had the most number of higher education institutions. That's what people said. I don't know if that's true or not. But and lately, several of them have closed, and they were taken over by other universities with mixed results. But nevertheless, the point is that even schools which seem to be successful, they seem to be on the rise. They had vibrant programs. They suddenly would close. And so, in the context of more and more failing higher education uh, institutions, Richard Vedder wrote, Let Colleges Fail: How to Unleash the Power of Creative Destruction in Higher Education, which is where I got the title for this episode. Apparently, he's a professor emeritus. I don't know where he's teaching. I think it's in Ohio somewhere, and his annual salary is $1. And I think it's because he doesn't really need to be paid at this point. I think he's over 80 years old now. And his revenue probably comes from the many, many books that he has written, articles that he's written, and also whatever retirement salary he has. And so he gave a short 20-minute lecture. Oh, that is the name of the lecture, I believe. Let Colleges Fail. Yes, Let Colleges Fail. It's from the Cato Institute. Let me get that exact title. Oh yeah, that is the title of the video. I think it's very close to the title of his book. That's where I was getting a little confused. Sorry about that. But anyway, so he was promoting his book, Let Colleges Fail, and he lists uh, 10 problems of the university as it stands today. Enrollment decline, public support is low, unpopular ideas are suppressed or ignored. And just so you know, unpopular ideas generally are pro-freedom ideas, right? These are very unpopular in the university, and so they are suppressed or ignored. Intellectual diversity is declining. I've talked about that. Cost is high for customer and the public. And you might ask, why the public? Well, because they're all subsidized now. So the cost of university education is extremely high. Next, students don't learn very much. In fact, studies have been done that many university graduates do not have that much more knowledge than the average high school student. Universities are overwhelmed by administrative bloat. Lower income students are less helped by the university structure. And I think what he means by that is that fewer and fewer lower income students are going to university. They're opting for other choices. The rate of return has declined, and so going to the university has become a risky commitment. And that's in the big indication of that is how many are unemployed after they graduate. And then finally, colleges are awful at efficiency. Too many of their buildings are empty and not used most of the year. And he hints at sporting activities. Also, he points at why does it take so long to get a law degree or a medical degree as compared to other countries, and I've talked about that as well. So I really like and respect Professor Vedder. Uh, every time I read one of his articles, I'm just right there with him. And part of the problem of the universities, why they have gotten this way, is because there is zero destruction in universities, at least until recently. In other words, there's very little change in university rankings. I think a joke he said was that Harvard was ranked near the top one or two in 2023, in the year 2000, in the year 1900, in the year 1800. In other words, there's very little change in terms of college rankings, and which builds up a sort of reputation. But how does one rate success? And especially if you think in terms of corporations, corporations rarely stay on top, number one, for any length of time. And that's because there's constant competition. So the universities, for there to be very little movement in terms of what is the best and what is not, is an indication of a problem. I would even go so far as to say that I think Asians are a big part of this problem, because Asians are all about the name recognition. And so you have a tremendous number of Asians coming to the United States. They all want to get into Harvard. And what that does is it sustains that popularity, that notoriety, that reputation, right? So as long as there's a demand, then you're going to have university rankings as they are. But once you're past the name, like I always tell people, one of the controversial things that I'll do in my church, which is an Asian church, and it's all about name recognition. I'll say, yeah, is it really worth it to go to a really famous university and then become this, a radical that you can't even talk to anymore at family gatherings, right? Is it really worth it? I mean, if you are really trying to go for some kind of employment, then you can go to any other school. It's not really all that important. If you're trying to be a politician, if you're trying for something else, then okay, fine. But otherwise, what is the point? And marriage has a lot to do with it in Asian circles. But if everyone who is going there are being socialized and socially conditioned to become a leftist radical, then do you really want to marry that person, right? And does anyone really want to marry you? And so I'm trying to change the way that people look at things, but I'm fighting an entire culture, half of the world, so but there's that. And so then he goes into where to reform. And so he has some suggestions: introduce more customer sovereignty. It's sort of like vouchers for primary and secondary schools. Give the money to the students, not to the schools. Instead of giving subsidies to the university, and then they, waste all of the money, you give the money directly to the students. And it's not the same as the loans, right? Also shortened the length of study, 3 years to get a bachelor's in Europe. Why do you have it 4 years here in America? Well, the answer is obvious, right? Because they want more money. So they have it 4 years, but many students take 5 or 6 years. Introduce markets within the university. In other words, make departments compete with their own budget, right? And my former university started doing this, that they started awarding uh, budget share based on the number of majors that you had. But of course, that became a sort of vicious cycle, right? The less money you had, then the fewer majors you were going to have, et cetera, et cetera. And it became a downward spiral. But there is a solution for that as well. But and I'll get into that in a little bit. Cut non-education related activities such as dormitories and cafeterias. And I know that a lot of people are like, whoa, but that's part of the university experience, especially athletics and what do you call it, campus rec activities and things like that. But they're not really part of education. You can just simply have, in other words, by providing them, the university providing them, that's why you don't see like LA Fitness or Bally's near campuses because they just can't get memberships there. Let them function on the campus, right? And so people who want to exercise, they can exercise there, and there's no cost, no added cost to the tuition. Creative destruction, in other words, more opportunity for upstart departments and ideas. There's less fighting against entrenched, tenured people, right, who believe that the university belongs to them. Well, look, if no one wants to learn your ideas anymore, so let's have creative destruction in the university. Accreditation also are designed to restrict competition. Universities are judged by inputs, not outcomes, right? Not where are your graduates going, what are they employing, where are they getting employment? It's not that, but how much money they put in certain programs like DEI. So impose standards which the accreditation imposes standards which are anti-merit based, and it has nothing to do with quality. As long as you have the program, okay, you satisfy that requirement. And so universities of very, very wide um, capabilities and quality are all put in the same category. You are accredited. Universities give exams, but why not give exit exams to truly measure student learning? Oh, Harvard grads, they get 79 on this test, but I don't know, Penn State grads get 85, and so you can see just how much actual learning happens at the university by exit exams, but no one really cares about that. It's the diploma that you want. Studies show that students study 30% less than students did 50 years ago, and there's a lot more grade inflation now. And so he suggests that schools where the entire student body grade point average is B, they should be taxed, right? Because it's way too high. It shouldn't be that high. Also, stop lending students, right? Stop entirely the student loan program has become something entirely ridiculous. It does not help people go to school. It rather gives graduating students crushing debt. So stop lending. Also, capital labor substitution does not work well. This was surprising to me because everyone talks about capital labor substitution, in other words, online learning or having recordings take the place of live instructors. And he was saying that what we saw during the lockdowns is that it did not work that well. Students fell behind. And he didn't go into AI, but I'm sure it would be more of the same. It reduces learning. So he had a lot of radical ideas like allow students to go to multiple schools, allow professors to teach at multiple schools. And what's happening is that all of these universities have lost sight of their true role in society, which is education. And the field of teaching, there is no productivity advance that he could see. And depending on what he means by that, you can agree or disagree. And so his basically he wants to see more creative destruction. And it's very similar to an expression that I coined myself, which is destructive instability or productive instability. There was an episode I should check what episode number that is. Hold on. Yeah, that was episode 172, where I talk about creative. Uh, what did I call it? Uh, I called it destructive stability and productive instability, right? So anyway, it's a twist on the same theme, but creative destruction, right? So you don't want destructive destruction, you want creative destruction where established norms are pushed aside because something better has taken its place. And I talk about it in terms of destructive instability or productive instability. That is to say, people don't like uncertainty and instability. You don't know what's going to happen next. But there are two kinds, broadly speaking, two kinds of instability. One that is destructive and everyone is worse off, or productive. or what Vedder would call creative destruction. Productive instability is where everything is uncertain, but everyone is getting better. Everyone's lives are improving, and the cell phone would be an example of that. It totally upended society. And if you grew up in an era or a time period where there were no cell phones, you know what I'm talking about. It revolutionized society. It just changed everything almost overnight. And so that is an example of productive instability. And so that you don't want destructive instability. War would be an example of destructive instability. Everything is getting worse, and you don't know if you're going to be even alive tomorrow. So those are the two extremes. And Vedder is an advocate of creative destruction. Um, and part of the reason why you didn't see this so much in the university until recently is because the price of making mistakes is ignored. Now, in the corporate world, when you make a mistake, the cost, the price of making a mistake is extremely high, and chances are the corporation goes out of business or they're no longer number one. Sort of like Bud Light, right? Their marketing campaign made Bud Light go from the number one light beer to no one's buying it anymore. Okay. So the cost of making a mistake is really, really high. But universities are subsidized, and so they do not care. In other words, they get tax money regardless, right? They get student loan money regardless of the mistakes that they make or the policies that they enforce. However, recently, school closings, right, universities closing their doors because not enough students are attending, pushes people to change. And this is a good thing. It punishes schools who are doing things wrong, who are making decisions that might be politically popular, trendy, but when it comes to actual education, it's really bad. And so he himself goes into what prevents destruction. He hints at government funding, and then he talks about, well, who owns the university? And so if you have a giant private donor who donates billions of dollars to the university, then that person has a lot of say. And of course, that person is going to try to avoid ruining their investment, right? And so uh, the more that you don't know who runs the university, the less accountability there is, and so the less learning that will most likely happen. So I was listening to this, and it was very much in line with things that I've always said. Um, it's like letting high schools fail. Well, who opposes the closing of high schools and secondary schools and primary schools? It's not the parents really. It's the faculty, right? The faculty, if a school closes, they have to go teach somewhere else. As far as the parents and the students, well, the school is of poor quality, and that's why it's failing. And so it should close, right? And then students get to choose to go to a different school. And the parents who generally do show up and say, oh, this school shouldn't close, it's because of convenience. It's not necessarily because of the quality of learning. And so I attempted to, like I saw, like this was, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I emailed the assistant dean who was my dissertation chair. And I basically said, look, enrollment is going down. We have to do something to reverse the trend, right? And we can do this. This is all we have to do. And she totally brushed me aside because the ideas were free market ideas. But that's what people want. People want to just learn about freedom and how to use all this information, supposedly good information that they're getting in the university. How do I make it work? How do I make it positive, and I was teaching that in my classes, but of course no one liked that, right? Because the universities have become socialization institutions. Everyone is supposed to learn the same thing, think in the same way, come to the same conclusions, and therefore usher in the Marxist paradise that everyone is supposed to know is the future. But of course, I went in the opposite direction, and I think that contributed to the reasons why my contract wasn't renewed. But it's a suspicion that I have, a justification for it. But of course, we'll never know if that actually was the reason. I have a strong feeling it was. But And by doing that, if you introduce that as a competing idea to what the university was doing, then you have this competition thing going on, and perhaps it might have saved at least part of the university anyway, and maybe revitalized part of the university. But because they turned away from it, they said, no, no, they doubled down on the very policies that were leading to declining enrollment, more of the negativity and more of the brainwashing and sort of making everyone the same, think the same. Because of all of that, they doubled down on all of that. I think it sped the decline of the university. And so, yeah, I see it as not a bad thing, especially since a lot of the sources of the problems that we have today come from these elitist universities. So it's not a bad thing that they're failing. It's not a bad thing that their failure opens the opportunities of other private institutions like the one in South Carolina, I'm blanking on Thales College, right, where they are going into a more traditional model of education, university education, and that's something to look into. Thales, Thales, Thales College, I think, or it might be university, but totally private. They try to be low cost and focus only on the necessities. And so you go there and expect, and you are probably given a quality education. So the decline of the old university model will lead to better university alternatives, even if it is not going to university at all. But anyway, so the bankruptcy of universities is basically the market punishing people who try to practice and run their business of a school with bad ideas. And that's it for this episode. I will talk to you next time.